today. We're hoping it will be very informative to everybody. My name is Hannah Boland. I'm a graduate research assistant in the ABE department, where I also serve as part of our Graduate Student Association as our professional development co-chair. I study fluid power technology at the Mahaya Fluid Power Research Institute. Thank you again for joining. For as far as the GSA, mostly what we do there is we try and promote different events to get people in touch with people from industry and also have the opportunity to have a lot of networking opportunities. So we're really thankful for the FEFP for letting us come on today to speak with everybody. These are the FEFP workshops that will be continuing next spring. So keep updated everybody on these as you see them coming out so that we'll have more workshops coming forward as we get into next semester. Alrighty. Joanna, do you want to go on to the next bit and we can get started with our
Yes, sorry. I just want to please ask everybody for the end of the event, if you can please fill in the evaluation. I know that some people just leave without doing this. I really appreciate that you do, because that's how we can improve future events. So back to you, Hannah.
Alrighty. Well, first I'd like to introduce our first panelist that we'll have today is Dr. Jay Darabaj, and I'll let him go ahead and give his introduction here on some of his experience.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jay Devraj. I'm currently a global technical leader for continuous processing within process science and technology R&D in Corteva AgriScience. I started my career as a process operator after getting a diploma in petroleum engineering back in India. Following that, I moved to Singapore, started working for Sanofi Aventis, a pharmaceutical company. There, I held a variety of positions from process engineer, process technologist, and so on and so forth. So from Singapore, I moved to the USA in 2009 and got my PhD from Purdue University in chemical engineering, and joined Dow Chemical Company in Midland, Michigan, as a senior research engineer. I moved up the ladder, working as a research scientist, and then became a subject matter expert for flow chemistry or continuous processing. Now I lead a cross-functional team that is dedicated to making small molecules, fine chemicals in a continuous manner instead of the traditional batch process that are prevalent in the specialty and fine chemical processes. So just to set a context, where I'm coming from, what my background is. Corteva AgriScience is a fairly new company, on a standalone basis, but has a very rich heritage, coming from Dow Chemical Company and DuPont. Many of you are familiar with that name. So 2 years ago, two companies went through a merger and split and become 3 different companies. And Corteva is a leading U.S.-based pure play agricultural company, which has presence in 140 countries. So a company is roughly 50-50 mix of seeds and crop protection products, and I work in the crop protection products, which are very, very similar to pharmaceutical products. And from our talent requirement point of view, we go to Purdue for BS and PhD chemical engineering, hires in chemical engineering, data science, mechanical, bioengineering, and industrial engineering areas. So from Corteva point of view, and based on my experience in chemical, pharmaceutical, and fine chemical manufacturing point of view, put a few general attributes when it comes to talent acquisition, recruiting process. Our process starts with initial screening, through a phone interview or an on-campus interview. We come to Purdue during the industrial roundtable. We go to specific departments during their symposium. For example, chemical engineering hosts an annual symposium in August, so we always go there, attend the symposium, and then we hold an on-campus interview following that symposium. So during the interview, we look for technical fit, job fit, and behavioral aspects of a candidate as a screener. So following that, we'll invite the candidate for on-site interview. And the last year and a half, because of the COVID, those on-site interviews are conducted virtually. So in the on-site interview, typically it starts with a technical seminar. This is again specific to PhD hires. Following the technical seminar, there will be a day-long interview, lunch and dinner meetings with multiple people. Sometimes multiple groups will be interested in the same candidate. So that interview extends throughout the day with approximately 7 to 8 interviews each. So the positive attributes, what we look for is the technical depth. As you should know, that there's no substitute for the technical aspect of the candidate. It is, absolute necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition. So a technical depth combined with communication, collaboration aspects, how their particular work or their skill set connects to the big picture, industry awareness. So all that is very important. Another key aspect is, wanting the job. You might think that everyone applying to a job, is looking to get a job, but what I really mean by that is, how desperate you are, how prepared you are for that position in that particular company. That typically shows up during this interview process. So I would strongly advocate to do some good work in that area. And then last but not least, well thought out questions during the interview process show how well you understand the industry, how well you understand your research area, how it impacts its peripheral ancillary areas. So all that is very, very important. From not so great aspect point of view, lack of first author paper. If you're looking to hire a PhD candidate who spent 4 or 5 years in grad school, invariably we try to see at least one first author paper that shows their technical depth, it's a peer-reviewed journal, their documentation skills, and so on and so forth. Other things are lack of collaborative and positive mindset, overselling, anything on a resume. So all those will create some red flags. How to prepare while you are still in the grad school is knowing what you want to do early on is very, very important. And align everything towards that. Your research area, your networking effort, your co-op and internship, everything should be aligned with what you want to do. For example, when I joined grad school, I wanted to get back to chemical industry because I spent so many years in the chemical industry. So I want to get a PhD and get back to chemical industry. But I chose a project that was related to biomedical area. So it took me a while to get back into the area of my expertise, where my strength is. So you have to be very, very careful and latch onto that concept early on during your BS or PhD study. Co-op and internship, that's a great way to put your foot in the door. If you do well in co-op, you do well in internship. At least in Corteva, we like someone on the last day of their internship, we give them job offers, right? So that's a great way to demonstrate, your skill set and how valuable you are to the company. Networking and again, any opportunity to work on industrial collaboration, add value to your networks. That's again is hugely beneficial. When I say networking, it's not a superficial reach out on LinkedIn or anything. It's more personal, more value add. On both parties, a continued a long-term professional relationship will help you a long way in landing your dream job. Again, finding a mentor, in your preferred industry. Again, you can reach out to them through LinkedIn or meet them in conferences and other settings. But the key here is, developing that professional relationship, building that connection and showing your value and how you can help them to solve the problems that are important to the companies.
All right, thank you so much for giving us your first presentation here. And now I'd like to pass on to Dr. Mary Lee Gambon with Rolls-Royce, and we'll pass on here. Thank you for joining as well.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Lee Gambon. I head the materials engineering organization at Rolls-Royce. I didn't put a blurb about Rolls-Royce in. I kind of assume everybody knows us, but just to be clear, Rolls-Royce doesn't make cars anymore. So in case there was that confusion, we're actually a power company. We supply power systems for aircraft, naval vessels. We also have a business that does ground-based transportation, including trains and heavy equipment. So a power company, largely. So I got my bachelor's degree at Purdue, and then immediately went on and did my master's at MIT. Mostly probably because, well, for two reasons. I graduated a long time ago, but and before most of you were born, but I graduated in 1982, and during that time it was a little bit of a dark time for industry. A lot of industries weren't hiring, particularly heavy metal industries, like steel was in a little bit of a downturn. So going to graduate school seemed like a great idea. And I was also just about to marry my first husband, who had a General Motors fellowship to go to business school. And so it seemed like while he was in business school, it would be a great idea for me to get a master's. So I initially went to graduate school, maybe with not a focus that I wanted to be a graduate student, but mostly it seemed like a great place to, keep doing something. Then I worked for about 9 years and then went back to school after working for a while to get my PhD. And it's a long, involved story about how I decided to go back to get my PhD, but I won't bore you with that here. But it was also somewhat a circuitous path. It wasn't that, I always intended to go back to get my PhD and I knew exactly what I wanted to do. It was more, again, kind of, well, this might be a good thing to do right now. So I went back to school and got my PhD. Really enjoyed it. I've always enjoyed graduate school. I think one of the things about graduate school is I always enjoyed graduate school a lot more than I enjoyed my undergraduate experience. So I'm hoping all of you on the call are feeling the same way. After graduate school, or actually during my PhD work, I took a role with the U.S. Air Force Research Laboratory in Dayton at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And they actually funded my PhD research, and I stayed with them for about 7 years and was a team lead and a research manager for them. And then went to Rolls-Royce and have been at Rolls-Royce now for almost 24 years. So I've had roles like Chief of Research and Technology Strategy and Manager of Critical Part Lifing. But most of my 24 years has been in the materials engineering team. So that's where I've spent most of my career. And now, and I guess for the last 10 years, I have led the materials engineering team. So if you would go to the next slide. What's my message to you today? So at Rolls-Royce, we do hire graduate engineers. both masters and PhDs. In materials engineering, we hire a pretty good mix of PhDs and master's degrees. I would say a master's degree at Rolls-Royce probably doesn't buy you much in terms of a different role beyond what we would bring a bachelor degree person in for. We basically see it as an equivalent of a couple years experience. So you would get essentially a role that you would have probably moved into after a couple years after your bachelor's degree. But a PhD gives you flexibility to do some other things. I will say when we hire a PhD, we don't necessarily hire a PhD, maybe unlike Cortiva, as you were just hearing about. I don't necessarily hire a PhD in materials to do something specifically like they have been doing their graduate research on. I look more at what that PhD says about you. And so to me, what a PhD says about you is that you can take a project of your own concept and you can work it both by doing research, by doing modeling or simulation, by doing experimental work, and come to a conclusion and basically express that conclusion in a reasonable way. And I think that is something that's really valuable. It's something that's really valuable to industry in the same way it's valuable in academia. So that's what we're really looking for. So what a graduate student can do to prepare for a career in industry, and actually probably almost any career, is make sure you develop your communication skills. You want to be able to take your very esoteric, very deep technical knowledge and be able to explain it to somebody who doesn't have that level of technical knowledge. You want to learn about the business side of the industry that you're targeting. And when I say this, I mean, learn about what their goals are, what their business goals are, not necessarily what their technology goals are. All that's good to know, but what their health is as a business, what their targets are in terms of expenditure on research, things like that. If there's a particular area you want to work in, you want to understand what the likelihood is of them funding that area, of pursuing that area. And you can do that with a fairly small amount of internet research. You can find out a lot about a given company in that way. But you can also learn it from going to technical meetings, from reading literature. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can pick that kind of stuff up. And then think about what you might want to do in a company. Don't assume because you have a PhD that you're going to go into a company and do fundamental RT. Sorry, are you still there?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yep, we're still here. We can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. My computer did something weird. Don't assume if you go into a company that you're going to do fundamental RT. We hire PhDs to do a whole variety of different things, and very few of them actually do fundamental RT. So if that's what you really want to do, you should make sure you ask those questions in the interview. Make sure that you seek out a company that's going to allow you to do that. But be open to a variety of opportunities because they can all be quite enriching. I think I've covered a lot of this. When you go into an industry interview, one of the things I think a lot of what you heard previously, it was really good advice, having good questions, all those kind of things. But one of the things to remember is particularly for on-site interviews where you might be taken to lunch or dinner or given a tour. Just remember that the interview starts as soon as you show up at the door and it continues until you're disconnected or until you leave. So I think one of the mistakes that some candidates make is they're really on during the panel part, and then you go to a tour of the laboratory, say, and they kind of just walk around and look around. They don't ask any questions. They don't show any necessary interest in what's going on around them, or they or at lunch they might say inappropriate things or tell inappropriate personal stories. You just have to remember that you're always in an interview. And if you do an internship as a graduate student, remember that that internship is essentially, the whole length of that internship is like an interview. So you always want to be thinking about putting your best foot forward, especially if that's a company that you want to pursue for a more long-term opportunity. So I think I'll stop there. I mean, I've worked for almost 40 years, so I could talk a lot about different things. But I think I'll let our third panelist give her tell her story and give her opinion.
And now I think we'll get started with some of our questions that we have for our lovely panelists. So a lot of the ones that we got in prior on our registration form were from a lot of international students. I know we have a lot of international students on the call, so I'm going to start with one from there. So a lot of people were asking, what are the best ways for international applicants to maximize their prospects in getting an industrial job in the United States? And from your guys' experiences in your own companies, are there any specific challenges that international applicants might face, and what are some good strategies to overcoming some of these difficulties when compared to maybe somebody with a U.S. citizenship? And if anybody would like to take this one, or each person, this is something that a lot of people were very interested in.
At Rolls-Royce, because we're a defense contractor, in the United States, we have a lot more stricture about who we can hire. And we generally do not hire international candidates right out of the box. We do sometimes bring in experienced hires, but we are a global company. So if you want to work for Rolls-Royce, there probably are places in the world you could work for Rolls-Royce as an international person. Certainly, I mean, we have facilities in Singapore, across Europe. So it doesn't preclude working for Rolls-Royce. It just would be difficult maybe to work in the United States.
So from Corteva perspective, and it's pretty common in chemical industry, the question about, again, this is specific to PhD hires, the question about citizenship visa requirement typically don't come up until very late stage in the interview process, and that typically doesn't become an obstacle. Again, this is very specific to PhD hires. This goes back to what Caitlin mentioned. What would be the successful outcome if the candidate has to go through the common pool of H-1B and then eventually into green card and so on and so forth. So from that prospective point of view, PhD hires typically don't face any problem in chemical industries. But when it comes to BS and MS, there are positions that will come out with tag saying that the company expects them to have the employment authorization in one way or the other.
All right, thank you for you guys' answers on those. I think next I'll pull a couple of questions that came up in the chat. One was on how is research different in grad school versus if you end up doing research for your company? And then also wondering a little bit what work-life balance is like in industry as opposed to what it's like in academia.
I can take that from.
Wait, well, sorry, Dr. Devraj. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I can take that from chemical industry point of view. So again, when you are in grad school, you'll be focused on very specific areas. So for example, from chemical engineering point of view, people do deep work in catalysis. But when you are hired into catalysis group in a chemical industry, then you will continue to do those kind of work and continue to go deeper and deeper work in that area. But if you are hired into a general group like manufacturing plant or scale-up units, those kind of places where you have to leverage your catalysis skill into other chemical engineering, broader areas that consummate your skills and apply to different aspects of the product development and process development areas. So that is specific to the research works, and the other aspect that is very, very different is the industrial research is very focused into commercial aspects. There are groups within chemical industry that work on the next big thing, 10, 15-year kind of time frame, but majority of the product that we work are related to something that is going to be commercialized in the next 5 years. So that means it comes with very specific deadlines, demonstrable in different scales. So to always leverage your skill into different product areas, different scale. And from work-life balance point of view, from Corteva point of view, it's great. After the pandemic and even before the pandemic, we have a flexible schedule in the sense that everyone have the opportunity to sign up to either site dedicated or flexible work hours or completely remote. And again, there's no set time that you have to be in the office. If this is even true before the pandemic, as long as the projects are moving, project deliverables are being made, there is no concern about the time of work, the duration of work. So none of those matters as long as the project is progressing.
Dr. Gambon, would you like to respond to any of those other questions before we move on to anything else?
Yeah, I was just going to say at Rolls-Royce, research is very much like Raj described at Corteva. It is very focused on product, so a little bit less fundamental than maybe you see in graduate school. Probably not as fast-paced as you see at Apple, because our products have a lot longer life cycle, so we have a little bit longer horizon for research. So it kind of is. It really depends on the industry you go into, how research is going to be conducted, but it's always going to be focused on a product or the underlying business goals of the company. That's one of the reasons I emphasized that when I was talking about it, and to be aware of that. I have raised two daughters. I have a daughter who's an architect out in Wyoming, and I have a daughter who's still in college. She's a physics major, and I've seen the whole spectrum of changes in work-life balance through 40 years of my career, from getting 6 weeks off after a pregnancy and then basically being expected to be back at work, to now having family leave plans that give you a little bit more flexibility. We're still not as good as Europe, but we're much better than we used to be. And what I've noticed, especially with the millennial generation that's come in and worked for me over the last 10 years, is that they are very much better at setting those boundaries and drawing those lines and saying what they expect. And industry, I think, is really working to meet those requirements. So, back when I started, there was no work-life balance. It was just, be at your desk and then you could go home. But it really wasn't discussed. That was not a term that was in our vocabulary. But I think today, if you ask, if you say what you're trying to do and you set those boundaries, as Caitlin said, you're much more likely to get a positive response. So it's a much better thing than it used to be. And I actually did the same thing that Caitlin did. When I was in graduate school, I worked regular hours. I wasn't there at 2 o'clock in the morning or working till all hours of the night. I don't work very well late at night myself. So what I found was that made transition to industry pretty easy.
Yeah, having that schedule already sort of in place really makes that easier as well for that transition. Next, I think I'll take another one from the chat. This one was from Cynthia, and specifically for Dr. Devaraj. I'm sorry. It was asked, could you please elaborate more on what overselling your resume means as a bad side in the interview? Thank you. Oh, Dr. Devaraj, you're still muted.
I'm sorry.
You're good.
So yeah, what I mean by that is, reflect, what you have done and what is your contribution is, and don't go beyond, what was, truly accomplished as part of your work, your study, your project, and try to give, contribution if someone has contributed to that work. If you played, a very specific role. So those kind of things are important and shows that you are, into collaborative mindset, like to work in the team, those kind of aspects. To just give a very short example, we were, looking at resumes and one candidate came up as a top, candidate for on-site interview. Going through the details of the resume, then there were 3 publications. And he was, noted as a first author. And then we started going through the articles, and then the article says, 3 authors have equal contributions. So I would expect that to be reflected in the resume, right? So this is, one example of overselling your resume. There are 3 others, but you are taking the role of a first author. So yeah, basically sticking to the fact and reflecting, what was done and giving credits if someone has, contribution to another aspect to the work accomplished.
All right, thank you. Next, I was going to take another one. There were several questions that came in originally about just general job hunting. And a couple of questions from that were, what are some of the best ways to find jobs and internships and create a strong application, especially with more of this online kind of an environment, because maybe a little bit more difficult to make an impression. And then also, what are some helpful networking practices that you guys have seen to help keep in contact with a recruiter following an interview, especially maybe besides just a thank you note, but what are some ways to make those personal connections that you guys have found helpful?
I was going to say that most graduate schools have people from industry who come and visit and, do presentations. And I've hired several PhD folks that have approached me after a presentation, say, or followed up. We're in the audience and followed up with questions. I always give my contact information, and I know my colleagues do too. So don't be reluctant to reach out to industry people if there's something that they're talking about that intrigues you and it sparks ideas that you have, even if it's not an interview situation. That's a really good way to one, find out if it's an industry that you might want to work in, or if it's an environment that you want to work in, and 2, start to find out whether an industry job would be worthwhile for you. So you can do that fairly early on in your graduate career and cultivate it all the way through.
Thank you. And
just to add,
Dr.
yeah, Caitlin summarized it very well about the importance of the thank you note. It's basically, I've seen candidates, who copy paste the same, thank you note to 5, 6 interviewers. I've also seen candidates who personalize each one of them, based on, their discussion during the interview, or they were not able to answer a question. They go back, do the research, and come back, how it's done, or any aspect, further research and the interest and further questions. So all that personalized message in the thank you note goes a long way. And in terms of networking, we talked about it in multiple different aspects. Is again, the personalization is the key. If, for example, if you're reaching out to someone on LinkedIn, or if you're meeting someone in a conference, be prepared to do a little bit of homework, what their area is, what their contribution is. If you read their papers, highlight that, how you find it useful, why you are interested in that, before, making that connection. So that always, again, goes a long way instead of, a simple email, hey, can you forward this email to, this job and so on and so forth.
All right, thank you. Lastly, we only have a little bit more time here, so I thought I'd choose a bit of a shorter question that I got quite a few times. People were wondering about how far out from intended working start date should one begin actually applying for the job, start making those connections, and start working on that whole kind of a hunt and whatnot.
For Rolls-Royce, it would just depend on, again, if you're applying into the new grad program, then that could be a year in advance without any problem. And even more than a year is not an issue. If you're applying to a specific job posting that's not just seeking general new college hires, you probably want to be closer to within 6 months of finishing up, and maybe even less than that. But we can usually be adaptable. If we really want a candidate, we're a lot of times willing to wait, but a lot of times those very specific postings are because we have a need because somebody's leaving or retiring, and we need somebody in that role. So.
Corteva is very similar to Rolls-Royce.
Okay.
We are, for our fresh PhD graduates, it's anywhere between 6 to 12 months in advance. But for experienced hires, we hire within 1 to 3 months of time frame.
All right, thank you so much. And I think we can try and squeeze one last question in here. This was given before, and then also I see in the chat. The question about referrals, are they important within a company, and how can somebody be competitive without a referral or previous relationships with the company to people who may have them?
Beats the odds of getting your resume to the hiring manager. Beyond that, it's the candidate's skill set and their interest and so on is what is important.
All right. Well, thank you so much for answering our questions, and thanks also to everybody who attended for your questions sent previously and also to the chat. And I'm going to transition now to our panelists. If you have any final comments that you would like to give to our attendees, and we'll sort of just transition to our final closing statements here.
I would echo, I wish everybody who's on the call the best of luck. Think of your career as kind of a plate of cookies. There's going to be a lot of opportunities that you'll have both in graduate school and after graduate school. All of them will probably lead somewhere interesting. They may not all be your ultimate best choice, but if I think of it as a plate of cookies, because even if you choose a cookie that you don't particularly care for, it's still a cookie, so it's not going to be bad.
Think I'm wrong with a cookie.
So be open to opportunities and adventure. Don't try to find that one perfect path, because there's probably not just one perfect path for any of you.
So absolutely, I agree what Mary said. Yeah, it's kind of in a journey, iteration. So when I started my first job, it was a process operator. At that time, I didn't know what I was getting into and what other opportunities are there. So once I get into the workforce, then I get to see all aspects of a business, how everything ties together. So that's where you get to develop new ideas, new career paths, what really excites you, what you don't like about a particular job or company. Then you take turns and improvise. So be open to those ideas, and continuous learning is another very, very important aspect of career journey. So be open to new ideas and continue to improve yourself. And I wish everyone the absolute best in their job search and their career.
All right. Thanks again so much to all of our panelists for spending their time with us today, and to all of our attendees. Just a reminder to please fill out the evaluation form that we have, the QR code here, so you can scan that and let us know any feedback that you would have for this and for future events. And also one other thing I'd just like to give a quick little plug to, we talked a lot about industry today. As part of the AB department, AB GSA, we have a graduate research industrial symposium that will be coming up on March 3rd of this upcoming year. Keep an eye out for announcements about that. That could be a really great place. We'll have industrial panels and we'll have an industrial roundtable for people to meet and greet. So that's a potential thing coming forward. Keep an eye out for places to meet industrial representatives and get to make some of those connections and relationships going forward. And that's all we have for today. And thanks again, everybody, for attending.
Thank you, everybody.